Well, hello and welcome back. It's great to see you again. I hope you've been well. Today, I thought we'd talk about a particular species of paper that's as unfortunate as it is common, the upside-down paper. At its most basic, the upside-down paper is a paper that struggles to get to the point. And that can be frustrating because it's clear that the writer has a point, they just haven't managed to get to it in time. So I figure I should get right to the point too. Without much delay then, let's talk about what causes the upside down paper and what you can do to fix it so that you can avoid them moving forward. Really, an upside down paper struggles to get to the point because the writer usually doesn't know what the point is until they're finished writing. And that's a natural problem to face because a lot of people use the writing process as an opportunity to figure out what they want to say. So it might take you a page or two or even 10 to really settle on what your argument is going to be. So for example, let's imagine that someone is writing a paper about how to improve access to mental health care on college campuses. If they figure it out as they go, they might end up with an upside-down paper, the outline for which might look something like this. Now, when we look at this outline, it looks more like a research report. There are lots of paragraphs that only convey information without really telling us what to do with that information. Additionally, there's only a real sense of an argument or of a clear thesis in the concluding paragraph. So a reader might be able to figure out how all the information in paragraphs 2 through 6 relates to the topic, but the paper won't tell them. And it certainly doesn't tell them how that information contributes to the argument that the writer is trying to make. This is all a problem because it means that the reader will have to sit through the bulk of the paper being pummeled with piles of information without really knowing where it's going or why they're getting all of it. That can leave them feeling overwhelmed or confused, and I probably don't need to tell you why either of those would be a problem. In other words, an upside-down paper is really just a draft that the writer is using to figure out what they want to say, and the poor reader is just along for the ride without really knowing where they're going until they get there. Whenever I'm reading an upside-down paper, there's always a moment where I get very excited that the writer has finally started to say something interesting, but then I'm disappointed to find that the next page is a list of sources. In those situations, I can tell that the writer was really onto something, but it just didn't make it into their paper. It stayed trapped in their heads. The real issue then is that the paper, when it finally does make an argument, doesn't really do anything to support that argument. It's just a dump of information followed by a take my word for it conclusion. The great challenge of the upside down paper is that it takes a long time to write and probably an even longer time to fix. If you have an upside down paper, it can be really discouraging to realize how much of your writing you need to throw out and how much new writing you need to do in order to salvage the project. Another reason upside down papers can be hard to fix is that some people might think that there's an air of drama to them. At least in some cases, they can give the impression that they start quiet and build in intensity only to end with a boom. So it can be hard to rearrange them if it seems like the fix will undermine that drama. But the reality is that upside-down papers start with formless heaps of information, build to an interesting but unsupported idea, and then end abruptly. In all this, it's worth remembering what your purpose is when you're writing an academic paper, or maybe to begin with, what your purpose is not. The goal of a persuasive academic paper is not to tell your reader everything you know about a topic. It's not to fill a minimum number of pages, and it certainly isn't to leave your reader in confused suspense until the very end. Instead, the goal of an academic argument is to tell your reader why you think what you think in order to motivate them to do something in a better way. When you write a paper with that purpose in mind, there is a lot of behind-the-scenes work that you need to do in order to produce a successful paper, but your reader never needs to see all of it. Think of yourself like a chef. At a restaurant, there's a good reason that the kitchen is usually in the back. For the most part, diners don't go to a restaurant to watch their food being cooked, and they certainly don't go to cook it themselves. Instead, they go to enjoy an expertly prepared meal. Similarly, your readers want your fully prepared and cleanly presented thoughts, but even if you have a rare gift as a writer, it's hard to do that if you're still trying to figure out your paper as you write it. It's kind of like a chef trying to put together a menu on the restaurant's opening night. But chefs have a tool for preparing thoughtful, complete, and appealing dishes over and over again, and it's a tool that we can learn from as we write. The recipe. Instead of just showing your readers all of your unfiltered research and then leaving them to figure out the connections that you see in it, take the time to start very clearly with your purpose from the beginning, and then explaining to them how each of the ideas you present supports that overall purpose. And that can be admittedly difficult in a first draft. If you don't know what you want to say yet, how can you make sure that your whole paper supports what you're going to say? But that's where our writer's recipe, or an outline, comes into play. We've talked about outlines on the show before, so I won't go into too much detail now about how to prepare them, but I will show you how they can make all the difference. So before you even start writing, make an outline. If you've already started writing and ended up with an upside-down paper, you can use a trick I learned in poetry school to get your outline started. Take the concluding paragraph of your upside-down paper, delete everything else, and use that last paragraph as the introduction for a new paper. We can see how this works by taking the last paragraph from our previous upside-down paper and making it the introduction for a new one. We can still use all of the same information from the original, but now we start with a clear sense of purpose and then build on it throughout. Can you see how this second version makes for a much stronger paper? Instead of just giving readers a bunch of information and implicitly working its way to some kind of thesis at the end, this paper starts out explicitly with a clear and direct thesis, and then it proceeds point by point to show the readers why the writer's thesis is a good one. Again, readers don't usually want to know just what you think. They also want to know why you think it, and why they should too. A paper following this kind of plan spends its time backing up its claims and showing readers explicitly how the research supports the thesis. In contrast to upside-down papers that leave their readers wandering through formless heaps of information, a paper built like this gives readers a clear sense of direction from the beginning and then tells them at each step why they're getting the information that they're getting and how it supports the overall argument. In other words, the paragraphs in a paper like this aren't just informative, they're also persuasive because each bit of information is presented in the context of an argument that the reader knows from the start. When you put together an outline, you spend a little bit of time figuring out your paper before you ever start writing it. Then with that plan, you can stop yourself from writing things that you'll have to get rid of later. Beyond that, if you do run into some issue with the structure of your paper, it's much easier to rearrange, cut, or adjust a few lines of an outline than to do the same to a few pages of a paper. So I've said it before and I'll keep on saying it. Outlines are one of the best kept secrets in academic writing. Even I was skeptical of them at first because it seemed like it was an extra step, but in the long run, they'll always end up saving you time. If you can separate the steps of figuring out your argument and writing your paper, then you can give your full attention to each one at a time instead of trying to juggle both of them at once. Put together a solid plan in your outline, and then all you have to do is write stuff that you've already figured out. Plus, if you use an outline, your first draft will probably end up being pretty solid because you dealt with all of the issues before you ever started typing. So this video is about fixing upside-down papers, but I suppose it could just as easily be about the value of outlining papers before you write them. In the end, upside-down papers are especially disappointing because they showcase a glimmer of their unmet potential in a way that other kinds of problem papers don't. Plus, the fact that upside-down papers are such a natural consequence of a normal writing process makes them especially pernicious. Luckily, they're easy to fix and even easier to avoid if you take some time to plan your way through your paper first. If you don't have an upside-down outline, it's impossible to end up with an upside-down paper. Now, if you do want to know a little more about putting together a solid outline, check out the video linked in the description. And I suppose I'll go ahead and get out of the way so you can do just that. Either way though, thanks for spending this time with me. I hope to see you again real soon.